The flight attendant's voice was firm, almost rehearsed. You can wait in economy while we sort this out. Alexandra Reynolds, CEO of Airline Technologies, an architect of a $500 million green energy deal, stood at gate C-16 with a confirmed first-class ticket in hand and disbelief settling in her chest. Her name was on seat 2A. The digital receipt was clear. The gate agent barely looked at it. We're fully boarded, he said, as though facts could be negotiated. You be more comfortable in economy. Comfortable. This wasn't a seat dispute. This was a message: you don't belong. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that 8 hours earlier, Alexandra had closed on a deal making her the majority stakeholder in Global Air Partners, the company that owned this airline. And now they had just told their new boss to wait in the back of the plane. But Alexandra didn't argue. She simply walked right past the gate, right into economy. And right into a moment that would shatter the airline industry from the inside out. If you believe no black woman should ever be told to wait in economy, prove it. Subscribe now and let us know where you're watching from. Alexandra Reynolds adjusted her tailored charcoal blazer as she stepped onto the jet bridge at O'Hare International Airport. The familiar tension in the air wasn't about turbulence. It was the weight of eyes, subtle scanning, always questioning. Her presence in first class still sparked doubt in spaces dominated by a particular image of wealth, power, and privilege. Even now, even here, today was supposed to be different. Her company, Airline Technologies, had just finalized a $500 million acquisition that would revolutionize green energy across 3 continents. She should have been celebrating. Instead, the gate agent's words echoed in her mind. You can wait in economy while we sort this out. Her boarding pass clearly read 2A. First class. She had booked it months in advance. But the flight attendant, Patricia Whitmore, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and the stiff smile of seniority, dismissed her concerns without a glance at her ID or booking app. There was no apology. Only the cold efficiency of someone used to making certain passengers disappear. Perhaps there was a system error, Patricia offered. We're fully boarded up front. The suggestion lingered. Just wait in the back. Like so many others told to be patient, polite, and invisible. Alexandra inhaled slowly, said nothing, and moved past them into row 34. If Patricia or the gate agent had paused for even a second, they might have noticed the elegance of Alexandra's wristwatch, the stitched monogram on her blouse, or the quiet authority in her stride. But they didn't see any of that. They saw skin, silhouette, and statistics, and they made a call. It was the wrong one. As Alexandra took her cramped seat in economy, legs folded uncomfortably, she texted her assistant Marcus. Get me background on crew for flight 2187. Pull files on Patricia Whitmore. Call Thomas Harrington. Urgently. Less than a minute later, her phone buzzed. Marcus was already on it. That's why he'd been with her for 7 years, sharp, loyal, unshakable. Meanwhile, 2 rows up, a young couple whispered, Isn't that Alexandra Reynolds? No way, the man murmured. Why would she be sitting back here? Exactly. Why indeed? In first class, Patricia returned to her usual rhythm, arranging champagne flutes, directing amenity kits, instructing junior attendants with practiced authority. But something nagged at her. The woman they just sent to economy hadn't pleaded or protested. She had complied too easily. That was the first sign Patricia missed. Back in economy, Alexandra slipped in her wireless earbuds. With the calm of someone used to high-stakes boardrooms, she dialed. Thomas, we need to talk. Flight 2187, now. Thomas Harrington, CEO of Global Air Partners, the airline's parent company, was due to meet her tomorrow. But Alexandra never waited for ceremony, especially not when her credibility and dignity were undercut in public. And she wasn't just another executive. She was the new majority owner. Back up front, Patricia prepared for takeoff. She still hadn't processed the nagging doubt. Not until a sharply dressed young man stepped into first-class Onay she hadn't seen on the manifest. Excuse me, she said quickly. We're preparing for departure. The man extended a business card with a simple smile. Marcus Washington, Executive Assistant to Alexandra Reynolds, CEO of Airline Technologies. Patricia blinked. She's requesting a meeting? He said, his tone light but unshakable. With the full crew, including Captain Spencer. Immediately. That's not possible, Patricia stammered. The captain is busy with pre-flight procedures. Perhaps you weren't informed, Marcus said smoothly, but as of 7:30 this morning, Airline Technologies completed its acquisition of Global Air Partners. Patricia's blood ran cold. She's your employer, Marcus added gently, and she's been seated in economy at your suggestion. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was seismic. Patricia turned pale, her chest tightened. She had just dismissed the CEO of the airline's owning corporation. The gravity hit her like altitude sickness. For the first time in 27 years, she felt something unfamiliar. Real career-threatening fear. Behind her, Michael Sloan, another flight attendant, looked stunned. His eyes darted from Patricia to the rest of the crew. Kevin, the gate agent, had already backed into a corner, looking anywhere but at the business card now trembling in Patricia's fingers. Back in economy, Alexandra closed her tablet and waited, calmly, confidently. She had played this game before in boardrooms during funding rounds at venture capital tables stacked with smug faces. The stakes were different, but the rules were always the same. Underestimate her, deny her, try to disappear her, and then watch what happens next. Sophia Chen, a junior flight attendant with auburn hair and uncertain eyes, approached quietly. Miss Reynolds, the captain would like to speak with you. Alexandra stood unhurried. All eyes were on her now, the very same passengers who watched her sit silently in row 34. They didn't know her name, but they knew power when they saw it reawaken. As she walked toward first class, the crew waiting awkwardly in the galley, Alexandra smiled faintly. They had no idea what was coming next. As Alexandra entered the galley, the air shifted. The small space once charged with unspoken authority from the crew now felt tense and uncertain. Captain Spencer, a tall man with silvering temples and a pilot's calm facade, extended a hand. Miss Reynolds, I understand there's been some sort of misunderstanding regarding your seat. Alexander accepted his handshake but didn't return the smile. That's one way to describe it. He cleared his throat. We had no idea of your connection to Global Air Partners. If we had known, she cut in, voice sharp but controlled. That's exactly the problem, Captain. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic respect. My confirmed first-class ticket should have been enough. Silence rippled through the group. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Her face had lost all color. Kevin, the gate agent, stared at the floor, visibly shrinking. Michael Sloan and Jasmine Davis stood behind them, their expressions unreadable. Captain Spencer tried again. I assure you, Miss Reynolds, this is not typical protocol. No, Alexandra arched an eyebrow, because my assistant just spoke with IT. There was no flag on my reservation. No double booking, no overcapacity. My seat has been empty since boarding began. Her gaze moved to Kevin. Do you have an explanation? Kevin stammered. The system flagged something. I was just following what instinct assumption or perhaps profile correction. Alexandra's tone remained even, but the words struck like thunder. Patricia's head snapped up. That's not a term we use. But it's a term your crew knows, Alexandra replied coolly, and it's one I'm becoming very familiar with. From the back of the group, Mayor Marcus stepped forward with a tablet in hand. Miss Reynolds, I've compiled staff records for today's flight. Would you like the summary? Please, she said, folding her arms. He read with the clarity of a prosecutor. Patricia Whitmore, 27 years of service. Multiple commendations, yes, but also 6 internal complaints filed over the last 10 years regarding seat reassignments and guest misidentification, each dismissed without follow-up. Kevin Dawson, gate agent for 3 years. Flagged twice for discretionary boarding decisions, both involving minority passengers being reassigned or questioned more aggressively than their white counterparts. Captain James Spencer. No formal complaints, but known internally for delegating passenger interactions entirely to cabin crew. The list went on. Marcus's voice never rose, but the impact was undeniable. Each sentence chipped away at the crew's practiced confidence. Michael Sloan shifted his stance. Jasmine Young, invisibly shaken, looked like she wanted to vanish. I think Alexandra said, eyes locking on Patricia, we need to talk about what really happened here. But I also recognize that 143 passengers are waiting to take off. So we'll defer the deeper discussion until we land in San Francisco. Captain Spencer nodded quickly. Understood. We'll prepare for departure immediately. Good, Alexandra said, already turning. Then she stopped. One more thing. Everyone froze. I'd like the names and personnel files of everyone involved in this incident sent to Marcus before we land. The board will need them for tomorrow's review. The message was clear. This wasn't personal. It was professional, and it would have consequences. Patricia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She was out of retorts and out of power. Captain Spencer gestured toward first class. Allow me to escort you to your seat, Miss Reynolds. No need. Alexandra replied, I know the way. As she walked past them, champagne was no longer the symbol of status in that cabin. She took her rightful place in seat 2A, the same seat she'd been told to abandon. Michael approached, visibly rattled. Would you care for a drink, Miss Reynolds? She looked up. Champagne. Cold. Michael returned moments later with a fresh glass, his hand steadier than before. Alexandra took a sip and turned her gaze to the window. Outside, the Chicago skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun. It had taken her a lifetime to rise from its streets to the sky. Now she was flying above the very systems that had once tried to contain her. As the plane began to taxi, Marcus sent her a discreet update from the economy section. Crew scrambling. Kevin called ground supervisor. Patricia pacing, Sophia nervous. Situation contained. She replied with one word. Good. Captain Spencer's voice came over the intercom moments later. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're now cleared for departure. Flight time to San Francisco is 4 hours and 15 minutes. The cabin fell into a hushed rhythm. Seat belts clicked, engines roared, and the aircraft surged forward. Alexandra leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of power return to her bones. Not anger, not revenge, just quiet control. And beneath that surface calm, a storm was building, one that would reshape an entire company, one policy at a time. The silence that followed Alexandra's quiet assertion was deafening. Around her, the hum of boarding announcements and the soft roll of luggage wheels dulled into background noise. Her voice hadn't risen. Her tone wasn't aggressive. But the weight of her words hung in the air like a gavel dropping on a courtroom bench. My ticket clearly states seat 2A in first class, she said, steady and calm, holding up both her phone and the printed boarding pass. I booked it 3 months ago. Paid in full, non-refundable. The young gate agent, Kevin, shifted uneasily behind his podium. His fingers danced across the scanner eyes, darting between Alexandra's pass and the screen before him. I understand, Mom, he said, still avoiding eye contact, but there's a discrepancy in the system. It appears your reservation isn't showing properly in our manifest. Alexandra didn't flinch. So the solution is to ask me to wait in economy. Kevin blinked, clearly uncomfortable. Just until we sort this out. I assure you it's not personal, but it always was. Before Alexandra could respond, a woman stepped forward from the jetway, a senior flight attendant in her late 50s, with tightly pulled silver hair, crisp makeup, and a practiced air of authority. Her name tag read Patricia Whitmore, Senior Cabin Manager. Everything all right, Kevin? She asked, glancing sideways at Alexandra. She believes she has a first-class ticket, Kevin muttered, lowering his voice. Seat 2A. I don't believe I do. Alexandra interjected, raising both her eyebrows. I know I do. Patricia gave a rehearsed smile. Well, there must be some sort of misunderstanding. The first-class cabin is fully boarded. Perhaps you could wait in economy while we sort it out. The phrase struck like a match in gasoline. That's the third time I've been asked to wait in economy. Alexandra replied, still calm but firmer now. Is there a reason why my seat is unavailable? Or is this about something else? Patricia's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened. Mom, I'm afraid we need to move quickly. If you're unwilling to cooperate, we have other passengers to accommodate. The subtext was loud and clear. Make it easy for us, or well, make it harder for you. Alexandra could have made a scene. She could have demanded supervisors, threatened lawsuits, or raised her voice until the entire terminal heard her. But instead, she did what years in boardrooms and battlefields of subtle bias had taught her. She recalibrated. Very well, she said smoothly, tucking the boarding pass back into her coat pocket. I'll wait. She stepped aside from the boarding area and calmly walked toward the rear of the aircraft. As she entered the economy section, passengers looked up, some curious, others surprised at the sight of a woman dressed like an executive being seated near the back of the plane. Row 34. She sat down, folded her coat neatly across her lap, and took out her phone. Her thumbs moved with precision. Marcus, need full background on Flight 2187 crew. Start with Patricia Whitmore, Senior Cabin Manager. Also connect me with Thomas Harrington at Global Air Partners. Urgently. She hit send. Within seconds, a reply flashed on it. Harrington will take your call in 3, sitting tight. M, a young couple sitting across the aisle, gave her a puzzled glance. Alexandra didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but she didn't care. Her mind was already moving 10 steps ahead. She tapped to her earpiece and made the call. Thomas, it's Alexandra. Alexandra, what's going on? Came the flustered voice of Thomas Harrington, the CEO of Global Air Partners. You're on your way to the board meeting, Hess. I'm currently sitting in row 34, she said flatly. Economy. I've just been asked 3 times, by the way, to wait and coach because of a system error, despite holding a confirmed first-class reservation. I need to know exactly who's on this crew and what kind of training they've received. Thomas exhaled nervously. Wait, you're saying they downgraded you? No, she replied. And I'm saying they profiled me. A pause, then, it'll get you what you need. Do that. And Thomas, she paused, her voice colder now. Make sure you understand. The announcement of our acquisition goes live tomorrow. But technically, the paperwork was finalized 8 hours ago. That means, as of this morning, I'm not just a passenger. She let the silence hang. I'm their boss. She ended the call. At the front of the plane, Patricia was setting champagne flutes into place, completely unaware that the woman she had just redirected to economy now held her professional fate in the palm of her hand. Alexandra sat quietly in her narrow seat, watching the cabin crew through the thin slit between seats. She didn't need confrontation to win. She needed truth and time, and she had both. From her seat in row 34, Alexandra sat perfectly still. Not because she was uncertain, but because she was calculating. Every word, every delay, every sidelong glance had been logged. She wasn't just tracking injustice, she was documenting it. The plane hadn't even left the gate, and already this flight was rewriting the direction of an entire company. Her phone vibrated once. Harrington expects your call in 2 minutes. Background on Whitmore and Kevin coming now, Marcus. She tapped the side of her Bluetooth earpiece and leaned ever so slightly into the window. The hum of boarding announcements faded behind her. Her reflection in the glass was calm, deliberate. The face of a woman accustomed to moving chess pieces others didn't even know were on the board. Across the aisle, a boy whispered to his mother, "Is she famous?" The mother shrugged, but even they sensed it. There was something different about her presence. She didn't belong in economy, not because of arrogance, because of purpose. She spoke softly into her mic. Thomas, it's Alexandra again. Are you sitting down? I'm at my desk, came the nervous voice of Thomas Harrington. Then listen closely. She recounted everything. The condescending smile, the system error, the casual way they told her to wait in economy like she hadn't earned every inch of space in seat 2A. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. When you held the power she did, whispering was louder than shouting. I need you to understand something, Thomas, she said. This wasn't a mistake. It was a judgment, a beat of silence. You're saying they knew who you were, he asked cautiously. They didn't. And that's the point. They assumed who I wasn't. A pause, then a deeper voice, more serious. What would you like me to do? Nothing yet, she replied. I'm handling it. But I'll need Global Air's full HR audit on Flight Crew 2187 before I land. Understood. I'll make the call. Make sure Patricia Whitmore's file is comprehensive. Will do. She ended the call and checked the crew manifest that Marcus had just sent. Patricia had 27 years with the airline, 12 as a senior cabin manager. No major disciplinary flags. But there was a note, informal nickname, Profile Patty. Alexandra's jaw tightened slightly. The meaning was obvious. Tricia had a reputation for correcting passengers who didn't fit her unspoken template for first class. Not official, never recorded, just whispers. But they were there. And now Alexandra had the power to do more than whisper back. She looked forward past the rows of navy blue seats, past the chattering passengers still boarding. She could see Patricia moving with tight efficiency, checking storage bins, inspecting trade tables, answering questions with an air of scripted cheer. Perfectly in control, but not for long, Alexandra typed a short message to Marcus. When we're airborne, prepare press briefing draft. Focus on systems reform, not the incident. Position us as correcting culture. Marcus replied instantly. Already in motion. Also, Sophia Chen Jr. attendant is clean. Just joined 6 months ago. Quiet, observant, no complaints. Alexandra saved the note. She would need allies inside the system. Not just to punish wrongs, but to rebuild. As the final passengers boarded, the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated while the crew completes a few final preparations. We'll update you shortly. She knew exactly what that meant. They were scrambling. In first class, Patricia was double-checking her service manifest when a sharply dressed man approached the curtain between cabins. He wasn't on her passenger list. Young, composed, eyes direct. I'm sorry, sir, she said. We're preparing for takeoff. You'll need to return to your seat. The man smiled politely and extended a business card embossed with a sleek blue logo. Marcus Washington, Executive Assistant to Alexandra Reynolds, CEO of Airline Technologies. Patricia blinked. Miss Reynolds, the woman in economy, she'd like to speak with the flight crew, including the captain, immediately, Marcus said with calm authority. Patricia's practiced calm faltered. That won't be possible. The captain is Miss Whitmore, Marcus said gently. Perhaps you're unaware. As of 7:30 this morning, Airline Technologies became the majority shareholder of Global Air Partners. Patricia froze, which means he continued, Miss Reynolds is now effectively your employer's employers. Employer, Marcus' voice remained respectful, but the message was razor sharp. She's waiting in row 34. You have 5 minutes to gather the relevant staff. And with that, he turned and walked away. Patricia stared at the card in her hand, the glossy logo shimmering under the cabin lights. Her world tilted. 27 years, thousands of flights. She had been the queen of this cabin until this moment. She turned to Kevin, who stood behind her with eyes wide and blood draining from his face. What do we do? He whispered. We speak with the captain, Patricia said, her voice faint. As she walked toward the cockpit, her legs trembling slightly, the illusion of control that had defined her career slipped away. She had made a judgment without knowing who she was judging, and now she would have to face the consequences. Captain James Spencer had spent 15 years in the cockpit, a seasoned aviator who prided himself on keeping his crew calm and operations smooth. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what Patricia Whitmore just told him. She who he asked, blinking hard, Alexandra Reynolds, CEO of Elysian Technologies. They just acquired Global Air Partners this morning. She's sitting in economy because we mishandled her boarding. The captain looked down at the manifest. Seat 2A, first class, still unoccupied, still marked as assigned to Reynolds A, and no one verified the ticket properly. There was a flag, Kevin interjected from behind Patricia. Not a real flag, Patricia admitted. Just assumptions. Captain Spencer closed his eyes for a long breath. We're not airborne yet. Get her up here now. Quietly. Moments later, Sophia Chen made her way through the cabin to row 34. Miss Reynolds, she said softly, the captain would like to speak with you. Alexandra stood with quiet dignity, gathering her belongings as the eyes of surrounding passengers followed her. The whisper started again. The same woman they saw politely pushed into coach was now being escorted back to first class by the crew themselves. She walked past Patricia, past Kevin, past the curtain into the small galley where the captain, Patricia, Kevin, and the rest of the senior staff stood waiting. Michael Sloan, the male flight attendant who had mostly stayed silent until now, was among them too. Miss Reynolds, the captain, said, extending his hand, I want to apologize on behalf of the entire crew. I understand there has been a serious misjudgment. Alexander accepted the handshake. That's one word for it, Captain. He cleared his throat. Please believe me when I say, had we known. She cut him off, her voice calm but firm. That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect. My boarding pass said 2A. That should have been enough. A tense silence followed. Patricia looked down at her hands. Kevin stared into the corner. Even Michael couldn't meet her eyes. Alexandra turned to Patricia. You've been with the airline 27 years. Yes, Patricia replied quietly. In those 27 years, how many passengers have you asked to move back to economy because of a system error? Patricia's mouth opened, but no words came. Alexandra didn't wait for a full answer. Because according to the flight data I just reviewed, she continued, this plane is not overbooked. My seat 2I still empty, along with 2B, and the only flag on my ticket was the one in your mind. Kevin began to stammer something, but Alexandra silenced him with a single look. Let me be clear, she said, addressing the entire group. This isn't just about me. It's about a culture you've allowed to fester where certain kinds of people are second-guessed, redirected, or denied what they've rightfully paid for. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Legal and HR teams aligned. Full crew files ready. Press holding for your statement. She tucked the phone away. I don't plan to ruin your career, she said, looking each one of them in the eye. But I do plan to change your culture. Then she turned to the captain. Now I believe it's time we got this flight in the air. Seat 2A, please. Yes, of course, Miss Reynolds, he said. Allow me to escort you. As they walked forward, Alexandra added one final note over her shoulder. And I'd like the personnel files of everyone involved sent to my office before landing. The board will need to review them. The message landed like thunder. Not shouted, just stated. But its weight was undeniable. Captain Spencer opened the curtain into first class and gestured for her to sit. Alexandra slid into 2A, her rightful place, and accepted a glass of champagne from Michael, whose hands trembled slightly. The intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're now cleared for departure to San Francisco. Flight time will be for approximately 4 hours and 15 minutes. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Alexandra looked out at the tarmac and the gleaming skyline of Chicago behind it, the city where she was born, where she had clawed her way from a shared bedroom in South Side to the highest levels of tech industry power. She hadn't planned to reveal herself this early, but sometimes silence only fuels discrimination. Today, power had a face, and it was hers. In row 34, Marcus was already connecting with other flight attendants under the guise of casual conversation. Alexandra had trained him well. People reveal more when they think no one is watching. By landing, she would know more than just who acted wrongly. She would know who could be trusted. In the seat beside her, 2B remained empty. That too made a statement. Because no matter how much prejudice tried to erase her from that seat, it was always hers. The Boeing 787 sliced through the clouds, cruising steadily at 37,000 feet. The hum of engines created a soft background rhythm, almost masking the undercurrent of tension that still lingered in the cabin crew's nerves. Alexandra reclined in seat 2A, her tablet open in front of her, not for entertainment but for strategy. She wasn't just reviewing her keynote speech for tomorrow's board meeting. She was quietly planning a structural audit tone that would begin with this flight. She had just made a few quiet annotations when Michael Sloan, the flight attendant who had served her the champagne, approached her with measured steps. "Miss Reynolds," he said softly, hands clasped in front of him. "May I offer anything else, perhaps a warm towel or a meal selection?" Alexandra looked up at him. He seemed sincere but tense, like a man caught between his conscience and the hierarchy that had failed him. "No, thank you," she said. "But actually, I'd appreciate your insight." Michael blinked. "My insight, yes," Alexandra said, closing her tablet. "You've been with this airline for 5 years, correct?" He nodded. "That's right. And during those years, how often have you seen situations like what happened today?" Michael hesitated. The easy answer would be rarely. The safe answer would be never. But something in Alexandra's gaze, her calm, her resolve, invited honesty. "More often than I'm comfortable admitting," he said finally. "Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's obvious. But it happens. To passengers who look like me," Michael looked down. "Yes. And what happens when you raise a concern?" Michael sighed. "You're told to focus on service, not create friction. I filed 2 internal reports over the years. No follow-up, no changes." Alexandra sat back, letting the weight of his words settle. She nodded once. "Thank you for your honesty. That's not always easy to come by in systems built on silence." As Michael returned to the galley, Alexandra typed a note to Marcus. "Confirm Michael Sloan's personnel file. Cross-check prior complaints. Potential candidate for ethics committee." Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Marcus was doing his own kind of auditing. He had struck up a casual conversation with Jasmine Davis, the youngest member of the flight crew. Her body language was guarded but curious. "So you've only been here 6 months?" Marcus asked, adjusting his tone to one of interest, not interrogation. "Yeah," Jasmine said, folding her hands behind her back. "Still figuring it all out. And how's the culture so far?" "Any surprises?" Jasmine hesitated. "It's professional. But there are unspoken rules, such as—" She glanced around. "You learn quickly who gets extra attention, who gets double-checked, and who doesn't, based on what—" She looked him dead in the eye. "Appearance." Marcus didn't flinch. "Thanks for being honest." Just then, the seatbelt sign flicked on. A gentle jolt of turbulence passed through the cabin. Over the intercom, Captain Spencer gave a standard update. "Folks, we're encountering light turbulence as we pass over the Rockies. Nothing unusual. Please remain seated." In first class, Alexandra glanced out her window as the clouds thickened. She saw her own reflection faintly superimposed over the vast sky layered between past and present. For most passengers, this was a flight like any other. But for her, it was a crucible. Patricia Whitmore emerged from the galley a few minutes later, walking toward Alexandra's seat. Her usual commanding stride was replaced with something more hesitant, more human. "Miss Reynolds," she said carefully, "may I have a word?" Alexandra gestured to the empty seat in 2B. Patricia sat smoothing her skirt. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "I've been with this airline for a long time," she began. "I've prided myself on running a disciplined, efficient cabin. But I see now that in doing so, I may have let habits go unchecked." Alexandra remained silent, allowing the words to flow. "I judged you before you even stepped on this plane," Patricia admitted. "Not based on your ticket or your behavior, but on a profile I never realized I had. You're not the only one, Alexandra said softly. But now that you know, the question is, what will you do with that awareness? Patricia looked at her, and for the first time, her eyes weren't hard with defense or protocol. They were full of something else, remorse. If you'll allow it, she said, I'd like to be part of the solution. Alexandra gave her a long look. Then she offered a nod, not forgiveness, not yet, but a signal. There was a door open, and it was up to Patricia to step through it. The plane began its slow descent into California airspace. In her seat, Alexandra refreshed the crew dossiers Marcus had compiled. Notes populated beside each name. Kevin repeated profiling complaints. Patricia, high-ranking but change-resistant. Michael, potential ally. Jasmine, fresh eyes, high integrity. Her finger hovered over the screen. She wasn't just building a report. She was building a case for transformation. The descent would end soon, but Alexandra's impact was just beginning. The Boeing 787's wheels made contact with the San Francisco runway in a smooth practice landing. The cabin shifted with the subtle forward pull as the aircraft decelerated. Passengers in economy exhaled in collective relief. Frequent flyers barely looked up. But in 2A, Alexandra Reynolds remained composed, her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the wing. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport, where the local time is 4:17 p.m. and the temperature is a comfortable 72 degrees. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. A polite chorus of clicks echoed as seatbelts began unfastening prematurely and flight attendants moved to their positions. But Alexandra didn't rise. She waited not out of deference but deliberation. Her phone buzzed quietly in her lap. A message from Marcus Harrington is in the executive lounge. As requested, another message followed. Replacement crew secured for return leg. Yours have been relieved of duty. She tucked the phone away, stood up, and retrieved her carry-on with one smooth motion. As she stepped into the aisle, Michael Sloan gave her a respectful nod. Jasmine Davis looked up from her post by the galley and smiled slightly, not the forced smile of airline protocol, but something real, something earned. Patricia Whitmore, standing near the cockpit door, stiffened as Alexandra approached. Miss Reynolds. Patricia began, her voice lower than usual. I hope the rest of your flight was efficient, Alexandra said, her tone crisp. We'll speak again shortly. Captain Spencer, standing tall in his uniform, gave a deferential nod. Miss Reynolds, I'd like to personally apologize once more for the confusion earlier. She didn't miss the shift in his posture, the sudden formality that hadn't been there when she was simply another woman with a boarding pass. Captain, I expect you and your senior crew in the executive lounge. Now, the debrief starts immediately. He blinked. Of course, inside sunlight painted the tarmac in gold. Alexandra stepped onto the jet bridge, heels clicking in sharp contrast to the hush behind her. Marcus was already waiting. They're all assembled, he said as he fell into step beside her. What did you find? She asked, not looking at him. Confirmed everything, Marcus replied. Patricia has a long-standing reputation for passenger reshuffling. Kevin's had complaints logged against him twice, never escalated. Jasmine's record is clean, and Michael's reports were buried like we suspected. Alexandra inhaled deeply, absorbing every detail. And the captain, no formal misconduct, but a hands-off leadership style. He delegates, crew issues, rarely intervenes. That's how this slipped through. That's how this was allowed to happen, she corrected. They passed through the private corridor toward the airline's exclusive lounge, bypassing the curious stares of staff and passengers alike. At the entrance, a young receptionist stood, clearly briefed. Mrs. Reynolds, welcome. Mr. Harrington is waiting in the private conference room. Thank you. The conference room was designed for power floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs, chrome fixtures. Every detail screamed exclusivity, yet Alexandra saw the room for what it truly was. A facade, like first class, like protocol, like corporate values when no one's watching. Thomas Harrington rose as she entered. He was tall, silver-haired, and visibly uncomfortable. Alexandra, he began, his tone attempting warmth. This is certainly not the introduction it imagined. Neither had I, she replied, placing her bag on the table. But it's exactly the one we needed. Before Harrington could respond, the door opened again. Patricia, Captain Spencer, Kevin, Jasmine, Michael, all filed in unsure of where to stand, let alone what to expect. Alexandra remained standing, arms calmly at her sides. I asked you here because what happened today was not a misunderstanding. It was a systemic failure, one that I have no intention of ignoring. Patricia's lips parted slightly, but Alexandra cut her off with a glance. You didn't just mishandle a boarding pass, she continued. You mishandled dignity. You mishandled accountability. You mishandled the very values this airline claims to uphold. The room was silent. She turned to Marcus. He handed out printed dossiers, each labeled with the crew member's name. These are your files, she said. Every complaint, every response or lack of one. Patterns emerge when you stop pretending incidents are isolated. Kevin looked at his folder as if it might explode. I'm not here to fire anyone today, Alexandra said. But make no mistake, change is not optional. As of this morning, Elysian Technologies is the majority shareholder of Global Air Partners. I don't just own a seat on the plane. I now shape the journey. She pointed to Michael. Mr. Sloan, your complaints were valid. You'll head the ethics committee moving forward. Report directly to me. To Jasmine Miss Davis, your integrity stood out. I expect you to be part of shaping the next generation of cabin leadership. To Patricia, you'll assist in designing new crew protocols with the understanding that your future here depends on the results, not your tenure. Captain Spencer straightened. And me? You'll be retrained, Alexandra replied, and reassessed. Thomas Harrington finally cleared his throat. Alexandra. She raised a hand. This is not negotiation. This is alignment, and I suggest we begin immediately. She sat down at the head of the table, calm, certain, unshaken. For the first time in decades, the flight crew of Global Air wasn't steering the culture. She was. As Alexandra sat at the head of the conference table, the room shifted, not physically, but in energy and posture, in who controlled the air. No longer just a tech mogul visiting the aviation world, she was now the gravitational center around which this entire organization would realign. Thomas Harrington took a breath clearly, trying to reassert some sense of shared power. Alexander, he said carefully, I think we all appreciate the clarity of your position, but for context, this crew, Patricia, Kevin, even Captain Spencer, they've been with the company for decades. Surely you understand that legacy counts for something. Legacy without accountability is dead weight, Alexandra replied smoothly. And if this airline is going to survive the future, it can't fly weighed down by the past. Patricia's expression was unreadable. Years of leadership had trained her to mask discomfort, but behind the neutrality, something was shifting. She'd felt it the moment she'd seen Alexandra's card. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition of something earned, of something she had once aspired to before the industry taught her who got to lead and who got pushed to the back of the plane. Captain Spencer crossed his arms. I want to be clear that I've always trusted my crew to make frontline decisions. It's how I maintain focus on the flight itself. Alexandra's eyes didn't blink. And how often has that trust been used to quietly reinforce bias? He hesitated. I don't think that's fair. No, Alexandra said, you don't see it. That's different. Michael Sloan shifted in his chair, then spoke up. She's right. I've seen things get swept aside too often. Complaints that don't escalate, passengers quietly moved, and the assumption always being they must have made a mistake. But they didn't. We did. The room fell still again. Alexandra turned to Marcus. Show the slide. He tapped his tablet. On the conference room screen appeared a chart anonymized customer complaints from the last 18 months. A sharp uptick in issues involving seating discrepancies, boarding pass inconsistencies, and passenger verification, all in premium cabins. Demographically, the trend was impossible to miss. The overwhelming majority of complaints came from passengers of color. No system is perfect, Alexandra said. But when your errors consistently affect one kind of passenger, they stop being errors. They become patterns. Thomas cleared his throat again. And your solution is structural change, Alexandra said. Starting with retraining that rewires expectation, rewriting crew manuals to eliminate coded assumptions, reviewing who gets promoted and why, and removing the gatekeepers who don't recognize the gates they've built. Kevin finally spoke. This wasn't malicious. I didn't look. I just followed the flag in the system. No system flagged me, Alexandra said, voice level. That was your bias dressed in digital clothes. And even if there had been a flag, your job was to question it, not reinforce it without thought. Patricia finally exhaled, then quietly added, she's right. I didn't see her. I saw someone who didn't match the image I've been trained to expect in seat 2A. And I acted on that. That's on me. Captain Spencer looked at her in surprise. But I want to fix it, Patricia added, voice steadying. I've been in this job too long not to know when something is broken. Alexandra regarded her for a long moment. That's the first thing you've said today that earns your seat at this table. She stood up again, looking each person in the eye. You've all spent years protecting the status quo. That ends now, not with punishment, but with purpose. You want to keep flying for this airline, then fly differently, lead differently, think differently. Thomas Harrington, finally realizing the tide was fully turned, offered a slight nod. You have my full support, Alexandra. We'll begin reassigning oversight roles immediately. You'll also begin quarterly diversity audits across all crew rosters and training pipelines, Alexandra added. I want progress reports, not promises. As the meeting wrapped, the mood in the room had transformed from defensiveness to quiet reckoning. These weren't bad people, but they'd been part of a bad pattern. A pattern so deeply normalized that it had taken a seismic moment to shake them out of it. Outside, the sky over San Francisco had turned a soft gradient of blue and coral. Planes ascended in the distance, metal birds carrying thousands of stories, some silenced, some rising. Patricia lingered behind as the others filed out. Ms. Reynolds, she said hesitantly. Alexandra turned. Yes, I just wanted to say I didn't expect this. Not the confrontation, but the second chance. I thought I'd be grounded for good. Alexandra offered a half smile. I don't discard people who are willing to do the work, but you'll have to prove this wasn't just a wake-up call, but a turning point. Patricia nodded. I will. As Alexandra and Marcus exited the lounge, the mood shifted again, this time not in a room but across an entire system. What's next? Marcus asked as they walked toward the exit. Now Alexandra said, slipping on her sunglasses, we prepare for the board. And behind them, an airline quietly prepared for takeoff on a different kind of flight. The boardroom at Airline San Francisco headquarters shimmered in the late afternoon light. Transparent solar panels above filtered sunlight through the ceiling, casting dappled shadows across the reclaimed redwood conference table. The room was a masterclass in quiet power green energy meeting executive function. Today, that harmony was about to be tested. Alexandra sat at the head of the table, a single tablet before her, flanked by Marcus and Eliana Vasquez, the company's communications director. Around the room, board members from both Airline Technologies and Global Air Partners filed in, their expressions tight with anticipation. The previous day's incident had already made its rounds, though publicly unconfirmed whispers moved faster than fact. Thomas Harrington entered last, his silver hair perfectly in place, but his eyes carried an unmistakable edge of tension. He took his seat across from Alexandra with the kind of corporate poise born from decades in boardrooms poise that now had to contend with a new balance of power. Alexandra opened the meeting without fanfare. Thank you all for coming. We'll begin with a review of acquisition status and next phase implementation. Her presentation was crisp, efficient, updates on integration logistics, timelines for departmental realignment, projected synergies between aliens, renewable energy innovation, and global air's logistical scale. The numbers were irrefutable. The vision was compelling. And then she shifted. Before we proceed to Q&A, she said, her tone changing slightly, I want to address a matter that concerns not just this merger, but our future as a united company. The room quieted. Every glance turned toward her. Yesterday, I boarded Flight 2187 as a first-class passenger, Alexandra began. Despite holding a confirmed seat, I was repeatedly instructed to wait in economy while staff sorted out a supposed system issue. What followed was not merely a misunderstanding. It was a demonstration of unconscious bias, institutional normalization, and a failure of culture. No one spoke. Even Harrington, who had likely rehearsed counterpoints, remained silent. This isn't about personal offense, Alexandra continued. This is about the systems we have inherited and the ones we choose to create. In the last 24 hours, my team has conducted an internal review of airline practices, crew, behavior training protocols, and complaint data. The results are consistent. The problems are not occasional. They are structural. Eliana tapped her tablet, projecting anonymized reports onto the screen behind Alexandra. Metrics, graphs, incident summaries. The patterns were irrefutable. Disproportionate reassignment of passengers of color in premium cabins. Profile-based verification escalations. Complaints brushed aside with vague apologies or buried beneath customer service jargon. This is not a PR issue, Alexandra said. This is a business issue, one that affects retention, loyalty, brand integrity, and investor trust. And it demands more than performative responses. Harrington leaned forward. And your proposal? Alexander didn't hesitate. Immediate structural reform. Effective this quarter, we launched the Inclusive Excellence Initiative, mandatory anti-bias retraining, complete overhaul of crew training materials, transparent escalation protocols for seating conflicts, and quarterly audits of passenger experience across demographics. She turned to face each board member individually. Our company culture will not be an afterthought to profitability. It will be foundational. Some faces registered approval, others skepticism. A few struggled to mask discomfort. A board member from Global Air's legacy leadership, a man named Mitchell Dane, known for conservative views, cleared his throat. Respectfully, Alexandra, isn't there a risk of moving too fast? Reforms like these, while admirable, can alienate veteran staff. Morale matters. Morale is built on trust. Alexandra responded calmly, and trust is impossible without accountability. We will not sacrifice one to protect the other. Harrington interjected more diplomatically. Perhaps we start with a pilot program, assess impact before scaling it network-wide. No, Alexandra said. We've piloted equity long enough. Now we implement it. The room paused again. What hung in the air wasn't rebellion but reckoning. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asserting a new standard. After a long moment, Eliana added, we've already prepared public messaging. We don't spin this incident, we own it. We present the changes as part of our broader transformation strategy. Innovation in culture, not just technology. Dane still looked unconvinced, and the inevitable backlash. Accusations of politicization. Marcus leaned forward, his voice even. The backlash is already here. The question is, do we lead through it or get buried by it? Alexandra's gaze didn't waver. We are not here to make everyone comfortable. We are here to make everyone accountable. Discomfort is not a symptom of failure, it's a prerequisite to real change. The final slide appeared behind her, a simple mission statement. Equity isn't a destination. It's the runway. There were no further objections. As the meeting moved to adjourn, Alexandra remained seated for a moment longer, letting the weight of the moment settle into the bones of the room. The silence that followed wasn't hesitant, it was resolute. Something had shifted. Not just a policy, not just a room, but a culture. And the flight had only just begun. The sun dipped low over the bay as Alexandra stepped out of the boardroom and into the glass-walled corridor that overlooked San Francisco's skyline. The golden hour cast long shadows across the floor, but her path forward felt clearer than ever. The vote was unanimous. The Inclusive Excellence Initiative had passed not as a gesture but as policy. Her words had landed. Now came the harder part: action. Marcus walked silently beside her, carrying a tablet, already filling with updates, interviews, scheduled policy drafts, requested training modules, flagged for removal. But for a moment, they said nothing. The air was still. Only the sound of distant city traffic buzzed in the background. "You've shaken a giant," Marcus finally said, breaking the quiet. "No," Alexander replied. "I've reminded it who it serves." Back in the executive suite, Eliana was already coordinating next steps. A news release was drafted, carefully worded but firm. Internal communications were being sent out to department heads across both companies. And Alexandra's calendar was filled with meetings, legal, HR, training, marketing. Each one essential to transforming this airline from the inside out. But Alexandra's thoughts lingered on the people behind the numbers. Michael Sloan, Jasmine Davis, even Patricia Whitmore. They weren't symbols. They were living testaments to how culture molds conduct. And if the culture could be reshaped, then so could the conduct. By nightfall, Alexandra and Marcus were back at the training facility, walking through a late-stage audit of the airline's crew induction program. The building was nearly empty, except for a few night shift custodians and the soft echo of their footsteps down the marble hallway. Inside the briefing room, Patricia was waiting. Shed requested the meeting. She stood as they entered, posture stiff, eyes unreadable. "Miss Reynolds," she began, tone professional but cautious, "I appreciate you agreeing to see me again today. I've had time to reflect." Alexandra gave a slight nod. "Go ahead." Patricia inhaled slowly. "You were right about the profile, about the culture. I've enforced it so long, I stopped questioning it. I saw it as discipline. Order, not exclusion. But yesterday, seeing myself from the outside, I realized how blind I've been." Her voice didn't waver. Not quite an apology. Not quite a confession, but something more powerful, a reckoning. Alexander stepped closer. "And what do you intend to do with that clarity?" Patricia lifted a folder from the table. "I spent the last 12 hours mapping the entire onboarding process, highlighting every subtle signal that reinforces bias. I want to be part of building the new system." Alexandra opened the folder. Handwritten notes, flagged documents, staff training scenarios reworked from the ground up. She looked back up at Patricia. "This is a start." Patricia's voice lowered. "I don't expect redemption, but I want to contribute to what's next. That's not a plea. It's a commitment." Alexandra studied her a moment longer, then extended her hand. "Then let's get to work." Just as the handshake landed, a knock came from the doorway. Jasmine Davis peeked in, clearly uncertain whether she was interrupting something important. "Come in," Miss Davis, Alexandra called. Jasmine stepped in, still in uniform from a late shift. "Sorry, I wanted to say thank you, again, for yesterday, for not letting it slide." Alexandra gestured toward the table. "Have a seat. We were just discussing how to make sure yesterday never happens again." Jasmine sat down slowly. "You know, in training, they always said treat passengers with respect. But no one ever defined what respect looked like for someone who didn't look like them." That sentence hung in the air. Alexandra leaned forward. "Then let's define it now, together." And so the three women began sketching what would become the new onboarding experience, a module not built on assumptions but on awareness. They stayed well into the night, writing, discussing, rewriting. Not theory but lived knowledge. Not optics but practice. At one point, Patricia paused, glancing up from her notes. You know, when I first started flying, I never imagined I'd take orders from someone like you. Alexandra raised an eyebrow, not with offense, but curiosity. Someone like me. A black woman, Patricia said, voice even. One with power, with vision, with the guts to actually change something instead of just surviving it. Alexandra didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth curved slightly. Then I guess we're both seeing something new. By midnight, the outline of the revised onboarding framework was finished. Eliana joined them briefly to review next steps and ensure the legal and communications teams were aligned. Before they left, Alexandra stood looking at the whiteboard filled with ideas. We're not just fixing a process, she said. We're restoring dignity where it was once denied, even if quietly. Outside, the bay breeze chilled the air as they stepped into the night. The city twinkled with possibilities. Tomorrow would be filled with reports, phone calls, and negotiation. But tonight, Alexandra knew, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't pushing alone. She was building a team. A new flight path had just been drawn, and this time everyone would know who truly belonged on board. The next morning broke over San Francisco like a quiet revolution. Alexandra stood at the window of her penthouse suite, coffee in hand, watching as fog rolled across the bay, wrapping the city in a blanket of possibility. She had only slept 4 hours, but adrenaline ran through her veins like a second wind. Today wasn't just about policy, it was about proof. Downstairs, Marcus waited in the black sedan already parked at the curb. He glanced at his watch as Alexandra entered, tablet in hand, hair slicked into a low bun, wearing a navy blue pantsuit with silent authority. We're on time, he said. Training facility first, then HR, then executive leadership with Harrington. Good, she replied. We need to stay ahead of the narrative. People don't change systems, they defend them. Until you show them another system can actually work. The car pulled away, slicing through the morning haze as Alexandra reviewed reports on recent incidents logged by the airline. A disturbing trend emerged. The majority of flag passenger disputes occurred not due to overt policy violations, but because of discretion. Too much room for interpretation. And in that space, bias thrived. At the training facility, Alexandra met with Helen Cartwright and a small group of instructional designers. The team had stayed late the night before reviewing Patricia Whitmore's notes. Now they stood nervously awaiting Alexandra's assessment. You've all been in this industry a long time, she began. You've seen change come in waves, some cosmetic, some structural. This is going to be structural, Helen spoke up first. We were surprised by how deeply some of our own assumptions shape the curriculum. That's the nature of culture, Alexandra replied. It teaches you to stop noticing until someone makes you look again. She placed a printed graphic on the table, 2 images side by side, both slides from the existing training module. One featured a white executive in a suit sipping champagne in business class. The other showed a young black man in sweatpants standing in coach arms crossed, looking slightly irritated. The caption read, "Be alert for potential escalations." Both of these images are real, Alexandra said, and both reinforce one message: who belongs where. The room fell silent. Alexandra continued, we will audit every visual, every phrase, every case study. You don't get to build equity on a foundation of coded language. Helen nodded solemnly. We'll need help, external help. You'll get it, Alexandra assured. I've already reached out to a consultancy that specializes in intersectional design and bias mitigation. But your openness to change will determine how far this goes. After 2 hours of intensive review, Alexandra left the facility satisfied that the first domino had been tipped. The real test would come at headquarters. At 10:45 a.m., the elevator doors opened to the 43rd floor of Global Air Partners Executive Tower. The walls gleamed, the silence buzzed with formality. She and Marcus were met by Harrington's assistant, who looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. They're waiting for you in conference room A. Inside, the senior executive team sat around a long glass table. Harrington was at the head jaw, tight hands folded neatly, as Alexandra entered and took her seat purposefully on the side, not the front. Power didn't need position, it needed direction. Thank you all for making time, she began. This won't be a standard performance review. This is a cultural recalibration. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. I want to begin, Alexandra said, by reading you a comment from a customer complaint filed just last month. She tapped her tablet. I was escorted back to coach despite showing a valid business class ticket. The agent didn't explain why. She just said, that section's not open yet for you. I was the only black man in the premium boarding area. Everyone else boarded freely. She looked up. That wasn't an anomaly. That was a pattern created by silence. That silence ends today. A hand shot up. It belonged to Richard Kerr, VP of Legal Affairs. Miss Reynolds, what you're proposing is ambitious, but won't it open us up to legal vulnerabilities if we admit to systemic bias? Alexandra smiled faintly. Not admitting it doesn't make it go away, and ignoring it won't protect you. It just ensures the next story goes public and costs more than your reputation. Harrington cleared his throat. We need a unified plan, one that communicates commitment without panic. Agreed, she said, which is why the first thing we will communicate is accountability. She turned to Marcus, who pulled up a dashboard of real-time analytics on customer satisfaction scores broken down by race, gender, and class of service. We've never looked at data this way, murmured one executive. That's the point, Alexandra said. If you never measure it, you never fix it. By the time the meeting ended, a roadmap had been drafted, new metrics, public reporting every quarter, a customer advisory panel, and a joint task force between LEN and Global Air for long-term reform. As the team dispersed, Harrington approached Alexandra. You've created a storm, he said flatly. No, she replied. I'm flying through one. The real storm came from what you refused to see. And then she left him standing there, eyes scanning the rain forming on the windows. Because change, she knew, didn't wait for clear skies. It took off headlong into turbulence. The news broke faster than even Alexandra anticipated. By noon, industry blogs, tech outlets, and even national newspapers were running some version of the headline, Black CEO Confronts Airline Over Discriminatory Seating Sparks Corporate Overhaul. The original article had leaked from an anonymous crew member. Names, no photos, just the essence, a high-powered executive forced into coach, a confrontation at 35,000 feet, in a meeting that changed everything. But it was enough. By the time Alexandra returned to her temporary office at Global Air's San Francisco branch, her inbox was already flooded. There were congratulatory emails from DEI advocates, cautious notes from other CEOs, and, tellingly, quiet messages from airline employees who had never dared to speak until now. Miss Reynolds one read, I've been with this airline for 18 years. What happened to you has happened to many of us, just not in first class. Thank you for speaking up. Another I've watched good colleagues be passed over for promotions again and again. You are the first executive who's made me believe this might actually change. And the most unexpected a message from a junior gate agent at another airport. I've been told not to board certain types in premium cabins unless I double check. There's nothing in writing, but everyone knows. Thank you for calling it out. Alexandra forwarded each message to Marcus. I want these catalogs, she said. They're the truth behind the data. That afternoon, she stood before a full cross-departmental assembly senior executives, HR managers, route planners, finance directors, and 24 flight staffers. Some looked inspired, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. She didn't need their applause. She needed their attention. We are not here to clean up a PR mess, she opened, stepping onto the small stage in the middle of the auditorium. We're here to build a company that earns the trust we've already lost. Behind her, the screen displayed a timeline 90 days. That was the window shed carved out for measurable change. Some of you have asked, why now? Why this incident? The answer is simple, because this one was seen. But what about the hundreds that weren't? She clicked again. Now came photos, blurred faces, timestamp boarding logs, seat reassignments. The result of Marcus' overnight dive into passenger complaint, data cross-referenced with internal flight logs. What you're looking at is a pattern, and in any system, patterns reveal values. Whether you wrote the rules or just followed them, this was our culture. Gasps were audible. A few heads bowed. And this, Alexandra added, pointing to a new slide, is what we're going to do about it. The room darkened. The next 30 minutes were a master class. Not in corporate jargon, but in real tangible steps. Anonymous reporting systems for staff, new crew evaluation metrics that included ethical conduct, quarterly audits, and immediate restructuring of internal advancement policies. No more gatekeeping by seniority alone. No more cultural conformity disguised as professionalism. As she wrapped up, a woman in the second row raised her hand. She wore the navy blazer of a lead flight attendant and spoke with a voice edged with fatigue. Miss Reynolds, some of us, we've worked here for decades. We've followed policies, done what our managers told us. If those policies were flawed, that's not our fault. Alexandra nodded, walking closer. You're right. It's not your fault. But now that you know it is your responsibility, the words settled heavily over the room. Responsibility, not guilt. Accountability, not punishment. I'm not interested in blaming, she continued. I'm interested in building. If you're willing to do the work, you'll have more support than ever before. But if you're not willing, you'll find this a very different company than the one you've known. After the meeting, as people filed out, some with renewed purpose, others with unease, Marcus approached. Feedback. Alexandra didn't hesitate. We hit the hornet's nest. Now we brace. He handed her a folded note. This was slid under your door while you were out. It read Seat 2A. That's all it should have taken. No title, no confrontation, just a ticket. I'm sorry it wasn't. I want to help fix it if you'll let me. P.W. Alexandra closed her eyes for a moment. Patricia Whitmore. She had expected resistance, maybe even resignation, but a handwritten note of apology, voluntary, vulnerable, that was unexpected. That evening in her hotel suite, she reflected on the week's cascade of events, from humiliation to upheaval, from coach to control. She stood by the window again, watching aircraft trail across the horizon like silver stitches in the sky. Each one carried a world. A child's first flight, a soldier returning home, a mother heading to chemo, a businessman on the brink of bankruptcy, a newlywed couple holding hands beneath shared headphones. And somewhere on those planes, someone would be quietly judged, assessed, sorted, unless the system changed, unless someone rewrote the script. Unless power was used not to punish, but to prevent. Alexandra reached for her phone and sent a message to Patricia. Come to the ethics planning meeting tomorrow. I want your perspective. Bring your history. The reply came instantly. We'll be there, she smiled. Change had a seat at the table now, and it no longer waited in economy. The next morning began with fog clinging to the windows of the executive conference room at Global Air's SFO headquarters. Alexandra Reynolds arrived early. Not to rehearse, she didn't need to. This was no performance. It was execution. The Ethics Committee formation meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., and by 8:50 the table was filling. Michael Sloan was already present, a crisp Navy binder in front of him, his demeanor professional but not stiff. Jasmine Davis entered moments later, greeting Alexandra with a soft, "Good morning, Miss Reynolds," and an appreciative nod. Then came Patricia Whitmore. For the first time since their confrontation, she looked grounded. No forced smiles, no defensive posture, just a woman carrying 3 decades of experience and the weight of reckoning. Thank you for the invitation, Patricia said quietly as she took her seat. Alexandra nodded but offered nothing more. This meeting wasn't about gratitude. It was about groundwork. Marcus distributed copies of the newly proposed structure, a tri-tiered ethics oversight team, composed of frontline staff, middle managers, and executive liaisons. Every level would have both voice and vote. Let's begin. Alexandra said, her voice crisp. She opened with the real objective, not just creating another committee to tick boxes, but embedding ethics as an operational function, not a reactive department. Culture is not defined by mission statements, she said. It's defined by decisions. Who gets promoted? Who gets protected? Who gets punished? That's where culture lives. Michael leaned forward. I reviewed the existing grievance protocols last night. They're more about containment than correction. Employees are discouraged from reporting unless they have documentation witnesses and can prove they weren't misinterpreting bias. Jasmine added, and when we do report, it's processed by someone in HR who's also friends with the person we're reporting. There were murmurs of agreement. Alexandra nodded. That ends today. From now on, bias-related grievances bypass traditional HR. They go through this committee with external oversight. I've already contracted a firm to support the transition. Patricia spoke next, her voice slower than usual but clear. In my time here, I've seen dozens of new programs introduced. Most fade after a few months. What makes this different? Alexandra didn't blink. Me. The room quieted. I don't intend to make suggestions. I intend to make policy. And I have the board's backing to restructure leadership if compliance is superficial. Patricia nodded slowly. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty, a kind of leadership rarely seen but instantly respected. Marcus projected slides outlining their short-term objectives. Revised training materials, anonymous incident reporting with protection protocols, flight-level behavioral audits, and most notably, data dashboard tracking equity indicators in hiring promotions in passenger experience. Jasmine raised a concern. How do we protect the crew members who speak up? Retaliation's real. Sometimes subtle, sometimes career-ending. We track it, Alexandra replied. Every committee meeting will be documented. Any report that correlates to disciplinary action without cause will trigger an internal investigation. If retaliation is confirmed, the consequences will be swift. We won't protect seniority over integrity. Patricia shifted. I'd like to lead the subcommittee on historical patterns. Bias isn't just in what happens, it's in what's never questioned. Michael glanced at her with surprise. Alexandra simply said, approved. But I expect honesty, not nostalgia. You'll get it, Patricia said. I'm tired of rewriting history to sleep at night. By noon, the committee had shape and mission, roles assigned, deliverables defined, and most importantly, a shared sense that this was not business as usual. After the meeting, Alexandra remained behind watching the fog lift over the tarmac. Marcus lingered by the door. You think they'll follow through? He asked. Some will, she said. Some won't. The system will sort them out, but the presence of the system that's new, and that's powerful. Her phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Harrington. Need a brief one-on-one. Today, if possible. She texted back, come now. 10 minutes later, Harrington arrived. He looked more rested than before, but his smile was tightly managed. Alexander, he said, taking a seat across from her. First off, congratulations on mobilizing the committee. The speed and thoroughness is impressive. Cut to it, Thomas. He cleared his throat. There's growing concern among our legacy investors that the company is shifting too far from core operations. I'm fielding calls questioning whether ethics should be prioritized over profitability. Alexandra didn't flinch. They're asking the wrong question, she said. The real question is, what kind of company do you become when you pretend ethics and profits aren't linked? Harrington hesitated. You're walking a thin line. And not everyone thinks this is your lane. She stood slow and deliberate. This is my plane now, Thomas. I decide the flight path. He chuckled nervously. You're serious. I am certain. As Harrington left, Alexandra returned to her window. On the tarmac below Flight 2187 sat refueling new crew, fresh manifests. A different future boarding. It was no longer just a number. It was a symbol. And that symbol now had a voice. A woman who refused to wait in economy. The following day, Alexandra stood in a narrow corridor inside the airline's corporate training center, dressed in a sleek gray blouse and black slacks, blending the elegance of a CEO with the resolve of a reformer. She had no press with her, no entourage, just Marcus, a clipboard, and a schedule. Today's agenda wasn't a boardroom battle, it was observation, field-level immersion. They entered a simulation room where a training session for new hires was underway. On the screen above the trainees, a role-play scenario played out. A customer in economy was demanding an upgrade due to medical needs. The correct response, according to the trainer, was de-escalation without accommodation unless status or payment could be verified. It was logical, procedural, and entirely devoid of empathy. Pause the video, Alexandra said from the back. Heads turned. The instructor blinked in surprise. Miss Reynolds, I didn't know you'd be your training people to follow rules. That's necessary. But where's the module that teaches them to question who the rules were made for silence? It'll wait, she added, folding her arms. Eventually, a middle-aged trainer with a badge reading Susan Avery Flight, Curriculum Director, stepped forward. We focus on consistency, making sure crew don't improvise. And I'm saying improvisation is sometimes where justice lives, Alexandra replied. She approached the screen and tapped it. Where's the training on unconscious bias? Where's the role play where a black woman in Armani is challenged for sitting in seat 2A even though she paid for it 3 months ago? The instructor swallowed. It's not part of the core training sequence, Susan admitted. It is now, Alexandra said. Marcus handed over a revised training outline developed overnight. It included new modules on cultural competence, bias recognition, ethical escalation, and non-discriminatory protocol enforcement. It wasn't just sensitivity training, it was systems training. After the session, one of the trainees, a young Latina woman named Carla, approached hesitantly. Miss Reynolds, can I say something? Alexandra turned to her open. I applied here because I need the job. But I stayed in training because I wanted to be part of something better than what I'd experienced flying as a passenger. Today, I feel like that might actually happen. Alexandra smiled. That's the point. We don't rise just to sit, we rise so others can stand. They left the training center and drove straight to the airline's operations floor, a vast glass-walled office overlooking SFO's runways. There, Alexandra convened a meeting with department heads, scheduling HR dispatch and performance review. Each came armed with spreadsheets and polished language. She wasn't here for spin. Let's talk about your metrics, she began. How are crew members evaluated for advancement? The HR manager, a pale man named Calvin with wire-rimmed glasses, began listing standard performance KPIs, punctuality, passenger satisfaction scores, absence frequency. And where do ethical flags show up? Calvin hesitated. We don't currently have a mechanism for tracking ethical behavior unless it results in a formal complaint. That's like only measuring fires that make the news, Alexandra said. She turned to dispatch. Who decides who gets assigned to which routes? It's algorithm-based, replied a woman in her 50s named Linda, with manual overrides for seniority medical accommodations and union obligations. And those overrides, Alexandra asked, are they documented? Sometimes, from now on, she said, every override will require justification and time-stamped approval. Then turning to all of them, if we're going to change culture, it has to reflect in your workflow. If bias lives in the shadows of procedure, then we're flipping on the lights. An assistant entered the room and handed Alexandra an envelope. Inside was a confidential report from the Ethics Committee's first 2 days of operation. Alexandra read it silently while the room waited. It confirmed what she suspected: over 70 prior complaints had been suppressed, redirected or ignored outright, some as recent as last week. She laid the report on the table. This is not a witch hunt, she said, but it is a reckoning. The room fell into uneasy silence. "We're not shuffling chairs on the deck of a sinking ship," she continued. "We're rebuilding the ship so it doesn't sink again." As the meeting adjourned, Calvin lingered. "Miss Reynolds," he said cautiously, "you're going to make enemies." "I don't care about enemies," she replied. "I care about standards." That night in her hotel suite, Alexandra sat by the window overlooking the Pacific. Waves crashed quietly beyond the glass, each one a reminder of power, steady, relentless, inevitable. Marcus entered with an update. Training modules are in active revision. The instructors were stunned but responsive, Patricius already rewriting the first session. Alexandra nodded. "Good." He paused, then added, "One of the board members called me directly today. Wants to know if this level of involvement is temporary." "It's permanent," Alexandra said. "This isn't a campaign, it's a culture reset." As the city lights glittered below, she whispered more to herself than to Marcus. "We're not just making room in first class anymore. We're rewriting who gets to design the cabin." The next morning, the executive wing of Global Air Partners headquarters buzzed with an energy that was equal parts anxious and electric. Word of Alexandra Reynolds' internal audit had already begun to spread. Not as rumor, those were easy to squash, but as certainty. Something was happening at the team, and it wasn't just another policy memo destined to die unread in inboxes. At 8:00 a.m., sharp, Alexandra arrived flanked by Marcus and two new additions to her task force, an inclusion specialist named Dr. Lena McBride and a systems analyst named Warren Choi. Both had been quietly contracted weeks prior in anticipation of this very moment. The meeting room they entered overlooked the tarmac. It had once been used to entertain investors. Today it would serve a different purpose: confrontation and recalibration. Already seated at the table were the heads of marketing, customer experience, training, legal, and fleet management. Also present, somewhat begrudgingly, was Thomas Harrington. His folded arms spoke louder than his tight-lipped greeting. Alexandra sat at the head of the table without ceremony. "We're going to have a different kind of meeting today," she said, sliding a folder across the table to each executive. "This is the preliminary report from our ethics committee." Inside each document outlined case studies of dismissed complaints, racial profiling incidents, and systemic failures in procedure and protocol. Before anyone could interject, Alexandra raised a hand. "This is not a forum for justification. This is acknowledgement." The room was still. She turned to Dr. McBride. "Lena." Dr. McBride rose. A black woman in her mid-50s with salt-streaked locks and glasses that glinted with hard-earned wisdom, she spoke with measured power. "What you're seeing in those folders isn't surprising to those of us who've lived it. It's not new. What is new is the company's willingness or lack thereof to address it directly." She let the words settle like dust before continuing. "You can't fix what you refuse to see. And if your systems are designed to silence the very people raising the alarms, then your silence is complicity." Murmurs rippled. A few execs shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Alexandra leaned forward. "Let me be crystal clear. Inaction is no longer a viable business strategy." The marketing director, a man in his early 40s named Greg, raised a tentative hand. "We've launched DEI campaigns before. We've even sponsored Black History Month events and partnered with nonprofits." "Optics," Alexandra replied coolly. "This isn't about image, it's about infrastructure." Warren Choi stood next. His screen flickered to life with a detailed flowchart of passenger complaint data. "This is what happens to a bias-related complaint." He said, tracing a red path that looped through 3 departments, got rerouted to customer satisfaction review, then terminated with a generic resolution, handled at gate level. In 86% of cases, Warren added no follow-up is made. "This is deliberate inefficiency," Alexandra said. "It protects the system from accountability." That ends today. She clicked a remote, switching to a slide with a short list of actions. Effective immediately, establishment of an independent review panel for passenger complaints, monthly ethics performance audits, inclusion of bias, violation metrics and crew performance, evaluations, mandatory leadership, recertification for all senior staff. The legal chief, a woman named Denise, cleared her throat. You're going to get sued. Alexandra nodded. Possibly. But I'd rather be sued for disrupting bias than for protecting it. Thomas finally spoke. You're setting a precedent that will ripple beyond this airline. That's the point, Alexandra answered without hesitation. Let it ripple. After the meeting, Marcus handed her a note. A request unexpected from Patricia Whitmore. If Miss Reynolds has time, I'd like a word. They met in the rooftop courtyard of the building where the sound of jet engines blended with the rustle of palm trees. Patricia stood as Alexandra approached. Gone was the defensive air. She looked humble. Thank you for not firing me, Patricia began. Alexandra didn't respond immediately. She waited. I've spent my whole career in this industry, and I thought I was doing it right. Being strict, professional, efficient, you were, Alexandra said. But you were also blind. Patricia nodded. I've started rereading the manual. Not just the procedure, what's between the lines. I see it now, I do. That's a start, Alexandra said. But seeing isn't enough. Changing is what matters. I want to be part of that. You already are. They stood for a moment in silence. Two women, one rising, one reckoning, meeting in the middle of accountability. As Alexandra turned to leave, Patricia called after her. Miss Reynolds, do you think people can really change? Alexandra looked over her shoulder. I believe people can evolve, but only if the systems around them stop rewarding the status quo. Back in the elevator, Marcus waited. She's waking up, he said. No, Alexandra replied. She's deciding, and that's more powerful. As the doors closed, Alexandra's phone buzzed with a new text, incoming press request from CNN. They want a quote on your reform movement. She smiled slightly. Tell them this isn't a movement. It's the new operating system. By Thursday morning, the industry had officially taken notice. Aviation news sites led with headlines like Tech CEO disrupts airline status quo and Alexandra Reynolds sparks reform from 36,000 feet. On LinkedIn, think pieces bloomed like wildflowers, some praising her courage, others questioning the cost of challenging legacy culture in such a public, sweeping way. But inside the heart of Airline Technologies, the momentum wasn't just external. It was operational. The ethics committee, now led by Michael Sloan, had already hosted 2 working sessions. Flight attendants and ground staff were invited anonymously to submit grievances, policy suggestions, and examples of bias they'd witnessed or committed. And they were submitting. Dozens, then hundreds. Some were heartbreaking. A passenger in a wheelchair forced to wait at the gate because crew forgot to bring the boarding ramp. A South Asian man in a business suit interrogated 3 separate times before boarding. A crew member with dreadlocks quietly passed over for international flights. But amid the stories of harm, something else was rising, a surge of purpose. That afternoon, Alexandra convened a strategy meeting with Marcus, Eliana, and 3 department heads. They're tasked to draft a blueprint for long-term institutional change. Not just damage control, Alexandra said as she entered the glass conference room. This is future-proofing culture. The whiteboard filled fast. Key initiatives, anonymous passenger, feedback portals, transparent promotion review, panels, bias interrupters training, independent oversight board with rotating civilian seats. We need it to be felt at every level, Marcus added. From the baggage handlers to the executive suite, no one should feel this doesn't involve them. Eliana leaned forward, her eyes lit. We could brand it as Flight Path 360, emphasizing that cultural accountability is a full-circle journey. Alexandra considered the phrase. I like it, but only if the impact matches the branding. We're not selling hope. We're engineering equity. Across town, a different conversation was unfolding. At Global Air's main terminal, Captain James Spencer sat in a sparsely decorated break room rubbing his temples. He had requested a leave of absence for personal reflection, term he hadn't used lightly. 30 years in aviation had taught him to value precision, and what he'd seen in recent days had shaken the foundations of his certainty. Patricia entered the room holding 2 paper cups of black coffee. She passed one silently to Spencer. "She's changing everything," Spencer muttered. Patricia nodded, and it was long overdue. Spencer looked at her, eyes narrowed. "Do you believe we were blind?" "I know I was," she said. "But blindness is curable if you want to see." Spencer chuckled dryly. "We're fossils, Patricia," maybe she replied. "But even fossils can become fuel. The question is whether we'll power the future or just sit buried in the past." Back at Airline, Alexandra's day was far from over. After the meeting, she asked Marcus to arrange something unusual, a listening session not with executives or managers, but with passengers. Within hours, a small group of former customers, people who had filed discrimination complaints in the past 3 years, were invited to join a confidential virtual roundtable. They appeared on screen one by one: a middle-aged black couple from Atlanta, a young Latina software engineer from Denver, an elderly Filipino veteran from Los Angeles. All had stories. All had been ignored. "Before we begin," Alexandra said to the group, "I want to make one thing clear. I'm not here to justify or explain. I'm here to listen and to ensure what happened to you never happens again." What followed was raw, uncomfortable, and deeply human. The couple from Atlanta described being told to wait until we board the real priority passengers. The Latina engineer shared how her boarding pass had been scanned 3 times while her white colleagues walked past untouched. The veteran recalled being told his military ID didn't count as real identification. Some cried, some were quiet. None had ever spoken directly to someone in power. Until now. When the session ended, Alexandra didn't speak immediately. She simply sat, absorbing the weight of it all. "I can't change what happened to you," she finally said, "but I can promise you this: it won't be buried." That evening in her office overlooking the city, Alexandra reviewed the new draft of the Flight Path 360 initiative. It was bold, comprehensive, unapologetic, just as she intended. Marcus entered without knocking, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, to surviving another day in the war room. She smirked, accepting the drink. "Feels more like building a rocket on a deadline." He glanced at her screen. "You really think this will work?" "Don't know," she admitted. "But I know what happens if we do nothing, and I'm not letting silence win again." Outside, the sky dimmed. Flights soared overhead, their red and white lights blinking against the clouds like signals in code. Somewhere on those planes were people. Black, brown, young, old, each with a story. Alexandra couldn't change the entire industry overnight, but she could make sure that tomorrow's version of herself wouldn't have to choose between silence and confrontation. That someone else could sit in 2A without wondering if they belonged. That was the path she was paving. One policy, one truth, one fight at a time. Friday morning arrived with a sharp chill in the air, but Alexandra Reynolds didn't notice. Her mind was already 12 steps ahead, orbiting around the next set of moves required to turn policy into permanence. She stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in her executive suite, watching the sky lighten over San Francisco. Every aircraft she saw take off felt personal now. A soft knock came at the door. Marcus entered with a laptop in one hand and 2 lattes in the other. "The first internal report from Flight Path 360 is ready," he said, setting the drinks down. "You'll want to see this." Alexandra turned her blazer, already buttoned her posture as sharp as her intentions. "Go ahead," she said. He opened the laptop and angled the screen toward her. The dashboard was impressive. Data visualization showed patterns of complaint distribution, crew engagement levels, and early feedback from anonymous staff assessments. Most importantly, the algorithm designed to detect bias incidents, trained on years of overlooked data, had flagged 37 examples within just the last week. 37, it's working," Marcus said quietly. "We're seeing what was invisible before." But Alexandra wasn't smiling. "We were right," she said. "The rot wasn't surface level. It was systemic." She closed the laptop with finality. "Schedule a presentation for the entire leadership team. Monday morning, I want every department lead in the room. No filters, No spin. Marcus nodded. And Marcus, she added, her tone dropping to something more intimate. This is the point of no return. We can't ease into change anymore. We have to go through the fire. He met her eyes. Then let's burn the old structures down. Later that afternoon, Alexandra found herself back at the airport not as a passenger, but as an agent of disruption. She walked the halls of Global Air's Staff Training Center with Patricia Whitmore by her side. An unlikely pairing just days ago, now tentatively aligned. Patricia had insisted on giving her a tour of the revised training module, version 2.0 she called it. This is the room where I learned to judge people by appearances, Patricia said flatly as they entered a modest training space. Seems only fair, this is where I start unlearning it. The presentation was sharper now, more inclusive imagery, case-based scenarios that addressed intersectional bias, and facilitators trained not just in compliance but in empathy. But Alexandra still wasn't satisfied. It's a start, she said. But there's one thing missing. Patricia frowned. What's that? Consequences. Alexandra stepped to the front of the room, took the clicker from the facilitator, and advanced the slides until she reached a blank one. This is the slide I want inserted at the end of every training, she said. It reads, bias has a cost. To the company, to your career, and to every soul you diminish by pretending not to see them. Patricia nodded slowly. We'll make sure it's added. After the session, Alexandra visited the ground crew hangar. These were the men and women often overlooked in airline reform conversations, mechanics, loaders, safety techs. But they were the spine of the operation, and Alexandra knew any cultural change that excluded them would be incomplete. She walked among them in a company windbreaker, not announcing her title, just observing, listening. One older worker, Raphael, recognized her. You're the woman from the flight, he said, the one they tried to send to the back. Alexandra smiled. I'm also the one trying to move the whole system forward. He grinned. We see you, just so you know. That night, Alexandra returned home late. She poured a glass of water, kicked off her heels, and sank into the couch, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night all week, but her weariness didn't come from doubt. It came from building. On the coffee table sat a stack of folders, potential board candidates for the new External Ethics Oversight Committee. One name caught her eye, Tanya Rodriguez. She recognized it instantly. The sister of the hotel server from earlier in the week. The woman who had started in customer service and risen to project management. She's got experience in operations, DEI initiatives, and energy distribution, Marcus had noted. She understands the stakes both culturally and economically. Alexandra picked up her phone and dialed. Tanya, she said when the voice answered. This is Alexandra Reynolds. I'd like to talk to you about leading something important. On the other end, silence, then disbelief, then hope. Alexandra ended the call and leaned back. That's how transformation happened, not in sweeping announcements, but in selecting the right people to steward the next chapter. As she looked out over the quiet city, Alexandra thought again of her father, who once told her that the hardest doors to open weren't the ones with locks, but the ones people pretended didn't exist. She had found one of those doors, and she was tearing it off the hinges. The boardroom lights were dimmed slightly, just enough for the presentation screen to glow like a portal to the future. Alexandra Reynolds stood at the head of the table, hands clasped, as the final slide faded into the company's new motto, Dignity Delivered Daily. The room was silent, not from disinterest, but because the executives seated around her knew something monumental was happening. Michael Sloan, now officially head of the Ethics Committee, sat to her right. To her left was Tanya Rodriguez, whose poised, confident presence radiated both curiosity and command. She'd spent the last 48 hours reviewing internal structures with a level of depth that impressed even Alexandra. The board had voted unanimously to appoint her to oversee the integration of equity metrics across all global air operations. I think we're ready, Alexandra said, finally breaking the silence. Thomas Harrington, seated across the table, gave a small nod. This will take time, but I believe this room finally understands why it's necessary. Alexandra looked him square in the eyes. Belief is good, Thomas. Accountability is better. The meeting adjourned, and as executives filtered out into the hallway, buzzing with cautious optimism, Alexandra pulled Marcus aside. Schedule a staff-wide town hall. I want every employee from pilots to janitors to hear directly from leadership about these changes. You want to go live? Yes. No filters, no PR middlemen. Marcus grinned. Now it's starting to feel like a movement. Later that afternoon, Alexandra took the stage in the airline's Central Operations Auditorium. Hundreds of employees were present in person, and thousands more watched via live stream. Her image was broadcast across flight crew lounges, maintenance hangars, gate staff terminals. She took a breath and began. 3 days ago, I was asked to sit in economy despite holding a first-class ticket. That moment for some might seem like a misunderstanding. For me, it was a mirror. One that reflected what many people experience every day in silence. Murmurs rippled across the audience. But I'm not here to talk about my personal discomfort. I'm here to talk about our collective responsibility. She paused, making eye contact with every camera, every corner of the room. This airline is changing. Not because of an incident, but because that incident revealed the invisible architecture of bias that has shaped our culture. On the second row, Patricia Whitmore sat rigid but attentive. Alexandra acknowledged her with a note in olive branch, with the weight of expectation behind it. Starting today, your roles are not just operational. They are ethical. How we treat our passenger show, we treat each other, will define our brand more than our logo ever could. She outlined the reforms and new training modules, external accountability committees, a whistleblower system with direct access to executive review, and a biannual equity audit with findings to be published publicly. These are not suggestions, she said firmly. They are commitments. Applause broke out, not thunderous but steady, from employees who'd long felt unheard. Backstage, Marcus handed her a tablet showing real-time chat from remote viewers. One message stood out: "This is the first time I've ever believed we mattered to the people at the top." Later that evening, Alexandra stood on the tarmac beside a decommissioned Global Air 747, its engine silent, its shell used now only for training simulations. Tanya Rodriguez walked beside her. "You're really doing it," Tanya said, "turning the whole system upside down." Alexandra shook her head. "No, I'm turning it right side up. It's been upside down for too long." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching a plane take off in the distance, its landing gear retracting into a body that carried more than just passengers now. It carried expectations. Inside the old aircraft, Alexandra requested a private meeting with the new internal compliance team. Among them were 2 former flight attendants, a gate agent, and a young systems analyst who had flagged an internal memo with racially coded language in a customer service protocol. "These are the people who used to be told to mind their place," Marcus whispered as they walked in. Now Alexandra was asking them to shape the new place. "We're not here to patch leaks," she told the group. "We're here to rebuild the entire plumbing. No more silent suffering. No more whispered injustices in the galley." They spent 2 hours mapping out the next 90 days, redraft protocols, collect anonymous testimonials, establish department-level response teams. Tanya would oversee system audits, Michael would track case resolution metrics, Alexander would personally review any complaints involving leadership. As the meeting wrapped up, one of the youngest members, a Filipino-American analyst named Deanna, raised her hand. "I just want to say thank you. I used to think speaking up was a career killer. Now I think it might be the beginning." Alexandra smiled. "That's the world we're building, where courage is a qualification, not a liability." Outside, the sky was painted in orange and indigo as the sun set behind the bay. Alexandra walked back to her car, her heels clicking softly on the pavement, her mind still spinning with next steps. She wasn't just creating policy. She was building a legacy. The sun rose gently over San Francisco Bay, casting golden light across the glass towers of Alien Technologies. From her penthouse suite, Alexandra Reynolds stood at the window, a mug of black coffee in hand. She wasn't thinking about stock prices or shareholder returns. Not this morning. She was thinking about a girl she once knew. A girl who wore her cousin's hand-me-down shoes to school, who sat at the back of the bus not by law but by habit, who walked past polished skyscrapers and promised herself one day she'd build one. That girl had grown up to become one of the most powerful executives in America. But the moment she was told to wait in economy had reminded her that even now power didn't always come with permission. Today she didn't just hold authority, she intended to redefine it. At 9:30 a.m., Alexander stepped into the alien executive boardroom where final signatures would cement the internal restructuring. In front of her were documents detailing the formal adoption of the Inclusive Excellence Initiative across all divisions of Global Air. Thomas Harrington, the airline's legacy CEO, sat at the far end, silent but composed. His posture conveyed cooperation. His eyes suggested calculation. Alexander didn't need his conversion, just his compliance. As the signatures were made and seals pressed into parchment, it was official. The reforms were no longer proposals, they were policy. From this point forward, every employee would undergo rigorous, third-party certified anti-bias training, not once but annually. A new Office of Equity and Ethics would report independently to the board. Every complaint, no matter how small, would be documented and reviewed with response times tracked in real-time dashboards. And a revolutionary passenger equity pledge would be printed on every boarding pass declaring that respect was a right, not a reward. When Alexandra stood to speak, the room fell silent. This isn't just an HR program. It's an institutional correction. We can't change what happened yesterday, but we can ensure it doesn't happen tomorrow. She tapped the folder in front of her. This isn't about revenge. It's about reconstruction, and it's long overdue. The moment she stepped out of the boardroom, cameras clicked. The media had been briefed but not invited. Still, the leaks had spread fast. Tech CEO enforces equity overhaul. After airline bias incident, from seat 34B to boardroom power play, Alexandra Reynolds makes industry waves. By afternoon, major publications were calling it the Reynolds Standard, a new benchmark for corporate response to internal discrimination. Some commentators called her bold. Others called her dangerous, but most called her necessary. Later that evening, Alexandra visited the training facility once more. Not for another lecture or inspection, but for something quieter. She walked into a break room where Patricia Whitmore, now head of cultural training development, was running a pilot session for the updated modules. The same Patricia who once redirected her to economy was now discussing bias triggers and empathy training with young recruits. When their eyes met, Patricia stood. "I didn't expect you today," she said, surprised. "I needed to see it." Alexander replied, eyes scanning the room with my own eyes. "Real change." Patricia nodded slowly. "I still don't agree with how I used to think, but I do understand it now. That's progress, isn't it? It's a start." They shook hands. Outside, the foyer rolled in low. The last flight of the day lifted off in the distance, its lights blinking against the sky. Alexander stood beside Marcus on the observation deck. "You've changed the course of an entire airline," Marcus said quietly. "No," Alexandra replied. "We've just reminded it how to fly the right way." He smiled. "What next?" She looked at him thoughtful. "Airlines were just the beginning. There are 100 industries built on silent bias. I plan to knock on every door and ask the same question: who gets to decide who belongs?" A few feet away, Tanya Rodriguez joined them. "I just got a message from a junior analyst in Denver. She said after watching your town hall, she reported her supervisor for making a racist comment, and HR responded within an hour. She cried when she told me. Said it was the first time she felt protected." Alexandra nodded, voice low. "That's why this matters. Not because of the headlines, but because someone somewhere finally feels seen." The three of them stood there in the quiet hum of the runway. They had started with a seat. Now they were changing the entire system. This story wasn't just about one woman standing her ground. It was about every person who'd ever been told to shrink, to wait, to accept less. It was about turning silence into policy, prejudice into proof, and humiliation into history. So the next time someone tells you where you don't belong, remember this: sometimes the most powerful answer isn't to fight for the seat, it's to own the whole plane. If this story moved you, if you believe that every person deserves respect, no matter their title race or seat assignment, then hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to see it and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This is more than content. This is a movement. Join us.